There are moments in human history when the world seems to stand at a crossroad between darkness and light, when cruelty overshadows compassion and power drowns the voice of humanity. The Holocaust was one such moment, a time when hatred ruled over reason and the dignity of millions was buried beneath the weight of a tyrant's madness. It was the darkest hour of mankind, a wound that scarred generations and silenced the laughter of innocent souls. But from the same world that gave birth to that cruelty, another spirit arose, a spirit of hope, forgiveness, and unity. A man who, after decades of imprisonment, chose not vengeance, but peace. That man was Nelson Mandela. When we look at these two worlds, the world of Hitler's darkness and Mandela's light, we are reminded that humanity is capable of both destruction and redemption. Hitler sought to divide the world through hate. Mandela sought to heal it through love. One man tried to erase difference. The other celebrated it as strength. One created prisons of fear. The other opened the gates of freedom. This is not just a story of history. It is a mirror for our time. It asks each of us, when we face injustice, what do we choose? Bitterness or forgiveness, cruelty or compassion? For the world we create tomorrow depends on the choices we make today. In the shadows of despair, Mandela teaches us that light is not the absence of darkness, but the courage to rise within it. Tonight, as we remember the victims of hatred and honor the champions of peace, let us understand that both the darkness of Hitler and the light of Mandela live within us. The question is, which world will we choose to build? The world has always been a reflection of both its cruelty and its compassion, its light and its darkness. History has shown us moments when humanity fell to its lowest depths, and yet, from those very ashes, it has also risen to its greatest heights. The Holocaust stands as one of the most haunting reminders of what happens when hatred consumes the hearts of men. It was not just the killing of millions, it was the death of empathy, the silence of conscience, and the loss of humanity itself. In those years, the world witnessed how fear and prejudice can turn human beings into instruments of destruction, how one man's hatred can poison the minds of many, and how power without morality becomes a tool of devastation. Yet even as the world wept for those lost souls, even as the smoke of suffering clouded the skies of Europe, another story was being written, a story of light, courage, and forgiveness. From the same human race that created the Holocaust came the spirit of Nelson Mandela, a man who endured 27 years behind bars, not because of hate, but because he refused to let hate win. Where others might have chosen vengeance, Mandela chose peace. Where others might have cursed their oppressors, he forgave them. His heart carried a wisdom that the world needed, the understanding that freedom without forgiveness is just another kind of prison. This contrast between Hitler's darkness and Mandela's light is not just about two men from different times. It is about two forces that live within every one of us, the power to destroy and the power to heal. The Holocaust shows us what happens when we surrender to anger and fear, when we divide people by color, belief, or race. Mandela's life shows us what happens when we rise above those divisions, when we see the humanity in our enemy and the hope in our pain. He taught us that forgiveness is not weakness. It is the most powerful form of strength. When we remember the Holocaust, we must remember not only the evil that was done, but also the lessons it left behind. And when we honor Mandela's legacy, we must do more than speak his name. We must live his message. The world will always have those who seek to divide, but it will also always have those who seek to unite. The question is not which side history stands on. It is which side we choose to stand on. So let this be our reflection today, that even in the darkest night, there can still be light, that from the depths of cruelty can rise the spirit of compassion, and that as long as humanity remembers both its sins and its saints, it will never truly be lost. The Holocaust was one of the darkest chapters in human history, a time when the light of compassion was nearly extinguished by the flames of prejudice and hatred. Millions of innocent souls were stripped of their dignity, their homes, and their lives, not because of what they had done, but because of who they were. It was a war not fought for justice or freedom, but for the supremacy of one man's twisted vision. It was not a battle between nations alone. It was a war on humanity itself. The Holocaust revealed the terrifying truth of what happens when power is guided not by conscience, but by cruelty. When the human heart loses sight of mercy and love, Adolf Hitler did not simply command an army, he commanded fear. He manipulated the pain of his people and turned it into hatred toward others. He took the despair of a nation and molded it into a weapon of destruction. Under his rule, truth became a crime, compassion became weakness, and silence became survival. He built a world where children were punished for being born, where faith was persecuted, and where the sound of suffering filled the air. In that time, the human soul was tested like never before. People who had once been neighbors turned against one another, driven by fear or blinded by lies. The Holocaust was not just the loss of lives, it was the loss of humanity's reflection. It showed how fragile civilization can be when it is not anchored in empathy and respect. It proved that when hatred becomes law and ignorance becomes culture, the world itself begins to crumble. Hitler's darkness was not just in his deeds, but in his ability to convince others to carry out those deeds, to believe that cruelty could somehow bring strength. And yet, history has shown that such power is an illusion. For hate, no matter how fierce, cannot outlast the truth of human goodness. Every concentration camp, every lost family, every silent cry from those years still echoes today, reminding us that evil triumphs only when good people choose silence. Holocaust is not just a story from the past, it is a warning to the present. It calls upon us to guard our humanity, to never allow prejudice to take root in our hearts, to never let the color of someone's skin, their faith, or their name determine their worth. In that darkness, the world learned how easily a nation can lose its soul when it forgets the value of a single human life. The Holocaust stands as an eternal reminder that power without compassion is destruction, and leadership without love is tyranny. From that pain, humanity must learn that no man, no ideology, and no hate can ever define the worth of another human being. Nelson Mandela faced not only the walls of a physical prison, but the chains of a spiritual one, a prison built by injustice, cruelty, and oppression. For 27 long years he lived behind bars, separated from his family, his people, and the free world. Many believed that such confinement would break his spirit, that bitterness would take root in his heart. But Mandela was no ordinary man. He understood that true freedom is not given by others. It begins within the soul. Even in his darkest hours, he refused to allow anger to rule his heart. He knew that hatred, no matter how justified it might seem, would only keep his people in chains. Mandela's strength was not born from power, but from purpose. He saw that revenge could never heal a nation divided by centuries of racial hatred. He understood that forgiveness, though painful, was the only path toward peace. When he finally walked out of prison, he did not carry hatred with him. He carried hope, hope that his nation could rise from the ashes of apartheid and become a land where black and white, rich and poor, could live as equals. His forgiveness was not weakness. It was the ultimate act of courage, for it takes far greater strength to love those who have wronged you than to hate them. Mandela's light was not a distant dream. It was a living example of what humanity can achieve when we refuse to be defined by our suffering. He believed that unity was not the absence of conflict, but the victory of understanding. He reminded his people that to build a new South Africa, they must first rebuild the human heart. And so he forgave his jailers, those who had humiliated and beaten him, not because they deserved it, but because his people deserved peace. He taught the world that forgiveness does not erase the past, it heals the future. He turned pain into purpose, isolation into inspiration, and hatred into harmony. Under his leadership, South Africa transformed from a land of segregation into a symbol of reconciliation. The same man who once lived in a cell became the voice of freedom for an entire world. Mandela's light continues to shine because it speaks to something eternal within us, the belief that even after great suffering, hope can rise again. His story reminds us that the true test of a person is not how they act in comfort, but how they rise in adversity. He showed that peace is not given, it is chosen. And in that choice lies the power to change the world. Mandela's life is proof that no prison can confine the human spirit when it is guided by love, and no darkness can endure where forgiveness burns bright. Hate is a fire that burns everything it touches, leaving behind only ashes of pain and division. It may roar loudly for a moment, but it always consumes itself in the end. Love, on the other hand, is a quiet force, steady, patient, and everlasting. It builds where hate destroys. It unites where hate divides. History has given us many examples of both, and none more powerful than the contrast between the cruelty of Hitler and the compassion of Nelson Mandela. Hitler built walls, walls of fear, walls of separation, walls that divided one human being from another. He ruled through terror, feeding on the weakness of hate to control minds and hearts. His power was great, but his vision was small, for hatred has never built anything that lasts. Mandela built bridges. He looked upon the broken pieces of his nation and saw not enemies, but people who had forgotten what it meant to belong to one another. Where Hitler saw difference as a threat, Mandela saw it as strength. He knew that no nation can thrive when its people are taught to fear each other. So he chose the harder path, the path of love, forgiveness, and reconciliation. He understood that real leadership is not measured by how many people bow before you, but by how many hearts you lift. He did not seek to rule minds through fear, but to awaken them through understanding. Hate may win battles, but it never wins peace. It can silence people, but it can never silence truth. The Holocaust proved how far humanity can fall when hate becomes law. Mandela's journey showed how far it can rise when love becomes leadership. These two forces, hate and love, are always at war within the human heart. Every act of cruelty feeds the darkness, and every act of kindness keeps the light alive. That is why Mandela believed that forgiveness is not a weakness, it is the highest form of power. It takes courage to stand against your oppressors, but it takes even greater courage to forgive them. True leadership does not come from domination, it comes from compassion. It is easy to destroy, to hate, to divide, to take revenge, but to rebuild what has been broken, to heal what has been wounded, that is the mark of greatness. Mandela showed that leadership is not about ruling people with an iron hand, but guiding them with an open heart. The legacy of hate fades with time, but the legacy of love grows stronger with every generation. So let us remember, hatred is loud, but love endures. It is love that heals nations, mends hearts, and reminds humanity that even after the darkest storm, the light will always return. The story of humanity has always been a struggle between darkness and light. Every generation stands before a mirror that reflects not just the past, but the choices that shape the future. The Holocaust and the life of Nelson Mandela are two powerful reflections within that mirror, one showing the depth of humanity's cruelty, the other revealing the height of its compassion. Hitler's world was built upon fear, division, and hate. Mandela's world was built upon forgiveness, unity, and love. And in that contrast lies the question that still faces every human being today. Which world do we choose to build? The Holocaust teaches us what happens when ordinary people surrender their conscience to hate, when they turn away instead of standing up, when they obey instead of question, when they fear instead of love. It reminds us that evil does not begin with violence. It begins with silence. It begins with words of prejudice, with the belief that one life is worth less than another. That belief spreads like a poison until it becomes law, until it becomes destruction. The Holocaust is not just history, it is a warning. It shows how fragile our humanity is when we forget that we are all part of one family, the human family. Mandela's life, in contrast, is proof that even after great suffering, the heart can still choose light. After years of injustice and imprisonment, he emerged not with bitterness, but with hope. He knew that to heal a nation, one must first heal the soul. He taught that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the triumph of understanding. His journey was not easy, but it was pure. He believed that one act of kindness could be stronger than 1,000 acts of hate, and that every voice that speaks for peace weakens the power of tyranny. Each generation must decide how it will respond to the injustices of its time. Will we turn away from the suffering of others, or will we stand beside them? Will we repeat the mistakes of the past, or will we learn from them? Mandela once said that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. That same courage is what the world needs now. The courage to choose compassion over cruelty, unity over division, and truth over silence. Every act of kindness is a strike against oppression. Every word of peace is a weapon against hate. When we choose empathy over anger, we carry Mandela's light forward. The darkness of the Holocaust must never be forgotten, but it must also never be repeated. Humanity's mirror is before us, and it reflects both our past and our potential. The choice is ours, to walk in the shadow of hate or to rise in the light of love.